Stop scrolling. Yes, you. I need you to hear this clearly. This message is not for everyone. And the fact that you're still here is not an accident. You've been carrying questions you don't say out loud. You smile, you function, you keep moving. But deep down, you know something is unfinished. Something between you and God feels delayed. If this just showed up while you were scrolling, and you felt that quiet pull in your chest, that's not the algorithm. That's awareness. You've been asking for clarity, for direction, for confirmation that God still sees you where you are right now. And here's the uncomfortable truth. There is a choice in front of you that you've been avoiding because you already know what it might cost. This isn't about fear, but it does carry weight. Because what you do next matters more than you realize. I won't tell you the answer yet, but before you leave, ask yourself one question. What if God is speaking? And this time, He expects you to listen. You didn't click this by accident. Before anything else, you need to understand this. This is a warning, not shouted, not dramatic, but heavy. The kind of warning you feel before you understand it. The kind that presses on your chest and makes you pause for no clear reason. I am speaking to you now, not the version of you that others see, not the version that knows the right words, the right verses, the right answers. I am speaking to the you that lies awake at night when the noise finally stops. You already know something isn't right. You've felt it in moments that should have been peaceful, but weren't. In prayers that started strong and slowly faded into silence. In the way you've learned to distract yourself instead of sitting still long enough to listen. You didn't walk away from me all at once. You drifted, and drifting feels safe until you realize how far you've gone. I have watched every step. I saw the moment you said, later, later when life slows down, later when the pain eases, later when you feel worthy again. But later became a habit. You told yourself you were just tired, that this season was different, that you'd reconnect when things felt more stable. And for a while, that explanation worked, because it didn't challenge you. But here is the truth you've been avoiding. Comfort has been shaping your decisions more than obedience. You didn't choose rebellion. You chose ease. And the ease is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel dangerous. It slowly replaces conviction with convenience, urgency with delay, surrender with control. You still believe in me, but you've stopped depending on me. You still talk about faith, but you've stopped listening. There was a time when my presence felt near, when correction didn't offend you, it grounded you, when my voice interrupted you, and you were grateful for it. Now, interruption feels like pressure. You scroll past what convicts you. You stay busy, so you don't have to be still. You tell yourself you're fine, because admitting otherwise would mean change, and change feels costly. But listen to me carefully now. Ignoring my voice does not make the calling disappear. Delaying obedience does not cancel the assignment. It only makes the weight heavier when you finally face it. You've been asking me for peace while holding on to what disturbs it. You've been asking me for clarity while avoiding the decision that would bring it. You've been asking me to lead while insisting on staying in control. That tension you feel, that restlessness that doesn't go away, no matter how much you distract yourself, that is not anxiety. That is conviction. Not to shame you, to wake you, because I would rather interrupt your comfort than lose your heart. You've told yourself, God understands, and I do. I understand your fear. I understand your exhaustion. I understand the disappointment that taught you to protect yourself. But understanding is not the same as approval. There are things you've normalized that I never asked you to carry. Patterns you've excused because they're common. Silence you've mistaken for peace. And deep down, you know it. That's why this message feels personal. That's why you feel exposed, even though no one knows your name. That's why something in you wants to turn this off, and something stronger won't let you. You aren't being singled out to be punished. You are being called because you are trusted. I would not confront what I did not intend to restore. I would not disturb what I planned to use. But understand this, every calling requires a response. Neutrality is still a choice. Silence is still an answer. Delay is still direction, just not toward me. You are standing at a moment that feels ordinary on the outside, but it is not. Moments like this don't announce themselves with signs and thunder. They come quietly, wrapped in awareness. And what you do with awareness determines what comes next. I am not asking you to fix everything today. I am not demanding perfection. I am asking for honesty. Honesty about what you've been avoiding. Honesty about what you already know needs to change. Honesty about whether you still want me to lead or just to bless your plans. Because I will not compete with what you refuse to release. I am patient, but I am not passive. And now, before you hear anything else, before you look for comfort or reassurance, sit with this. What if this is the moment you look back on and realize everything could have shifted? Depending on what you chose to do next, you're still here. That matters more than you think. Because many would have turned away by now. Not because this isn't true, but because it's uncomfortable to stay where truth begins to touch what we've hidden. I am not distant from you in this moment. I am closer than you realize. I know the memories you avoid revisiting, the prayers you stopped praying because they felt unanswered, the promises you once made to me, and the quiet guilt that followed when life pulled you elsewhere. You didn't forget me. You learned how to live without listening, and I allowed the silence longer than you expected, not because I left, but because I was waiting to see what you would do when the noise faded. You've wondered why certain things stopped working, why what once satisfied you now feels empty, why you can't return to who you were before. That is no punishment. That is mercy, because if comfort had remained, you would have settled. If distraction had satisfied, you would have stopped searching. If everything felt fine, you would never have noticed what was missing. I removed ease so you could recognize dependence. I allowed restlessness so you could remember me. You've been afraid that coming back would mean losing too much, that obedience would cost you control, relationships, plans you worked hard to build. You're not wrong. It will cost you something. But what you haven't considered is what staying where you are is already costing you. Your peace, your clarity, your sensitivity to my voice. You felt it. That dullness that wasn't there before. That hesitation when you used to move with confidence. That quiet fear that time is passing and you're standing still. That fear didn't come from me, but I am using it to call you home. I am not asking you to run ahead. I am asking you to turn around. Return does not begin with action. It begins with surrender, with a moment where you stop explaining yourself and simply say, I know you're right. You don't need to impress me. You don't need perfect words. You don't need to understand every step. You only need to be willing, because the moment you stop resisting, I will meet you there. I have not changed my mind about you. I have not reassigned what I placed in your hands. I have not withdrawn my grace, but I will not force you forward. Love does not drag, it invites. So now you must decide what you will do with this moment. Not tomorrow, not when things feel easier, not when you feel ready. Right now, will you keep managing the distance, or will you let me close it? Sit with that, because what you choose next will determine whether this was just another message you heard, or the moment everything finally began to realign. You're closer than you think. Not because you've done everything right, but because you're still listening. There was a time when you believed closeness meant certainty, when you thought walking with me meant never doubting, never hesitating, never struggling the way you do now. And when that illusion broke, you assumed distance had begun. But hear me carefully. Distance did not start when you began to struggle. Distance started when you stopped being honest. You learned how to pray without saying what you actually felt. You learned how to worship while guarding parts of your heart. You learned how to say, I trust you, while quietly holding the wheel. And I let you, not because I was pleased with the distance, but because I will not violate your freedom to choose me. You've been wondering why my voice feels quieter now, why direction doesn't come as clearly as it once did, why discernment feels harder, slower, less sure. It's not because I stopped speaking. It's because obedience stopped following the last thing I said. I will not give new direction when old instruction is still waiting. There is something specific you've been circling around, a conversation you've delayed, a habit you've justified, a step you've postponed because you fear what it might change. You keep asking me to show you the outcome, but faith has never worked that way. I ask for trust before clarity, movement before confirmation, surrender before relief. That has always been the order. You've been trying to negotiate instead of obey, trying to understand instead of follow, trying to feel ready instead of be willing. And that tension you feel, the one that won't go away, is not condemnation. It is alignment trying to happen. I am not disappointed in you, but I am serious with you. Because what is ahead of you requires sensitivity. You are losing by staying comfortable. What I am preparing you for cannot be carried with divided attention. What I am calling you into will demand a cleaner yes than you've been giving. This is not about rules. This is about relationship. I am not asking you to become someone else. I am asking you to stop becoming numb. You don't need to do everything at once. But you cannot keep doing nothing. The next step is not dramatic. It is honest, a quiet decision, a private surrender, a willingness to obey even if no one else ever sees it. That is where closeness is restored. So don't rush past this moment. Don't minimize what you feel right now. Don't talk yourself out of what you already recognize. Because this awareness, this weight, this clarity will not stay forever. And what you do with it will shape what you hear from me next. This is where it becomes real. Not loud, not public, not dramatic. Real in the way that happens when it's just you and me, and no one else knows what decision is being weighed. You've noticed how easy it is to delay this moment, to tell yourself you'll respond later, think about it more, pray about it longer. But deep down, you know this isn't about needing more time. It's about needing courage. Because obedience always asks you to let go of something familiar. And familiarity can feel safer than freedom. You've been holding on to things that once helped you survive, but are now keeping you from growing. Old defenses, old patterns, old versions of yourself that made sense then, but don't belong now. And I know why you hesitate. You're afraid that if you release them, you won't recognize who you become. You're afraid that surrender will cost you parts of yourself you worked hard to build. You're afraid that obedience will leave you exposed. But listen to me. I never ask you to release anything without intending to replace it with something truer. I am not trying to strip you. I am trying to free you. What you call control, I see as burden. What you call protection, I see as isolation. What you call caution, I see as fear quietly making decisions for you. And fear is patient. It doesn't rush you. It just keeps you still. That's why this moment feels heavy. Because you can sense the difference between staying where you are and stepping into what requires trust. You've prayed for growth. You've prayed for direction. You've prayed for change. But change always arrives carrying responsibility. Not to perform, not to impress, but to respond. You don't need to have every answer before you move. You don't need to feel strong before you say yes. You don't need to see the full path to take the next step. You only need to stop resisting what you already know. I am not waiting for you to become fearless. I am waiting for you to stop letting fear decide. And now, here you are, aware, unsettled, present. This is not pressure. This is invitation. But invitations are time-sensitive. They don't force you. They don't chase you. They simply wait for a response. And the longer you sit in this moment, the more honest the question becomes. Are you willing to trust me with what comes next? Or will you choose what feels safe, even if it keeps you where you are? Now listen carefully, because this is where many turn back. Not because they don't believe, but because belief is easier than surrender. You've been telling yourself that staying where you are is neutral, that waiting is wise, that doing nothing is safer than choosing wrong. But there is no neutral ground here. Oh, every day you delay, something in you is being shaped, either by trust or by fear. And fear is subtle. It doesn't tell you to run away from me. It just convinces you that now isn't the right time, that you'll respond when you feel stronger, when life is clearer, when you're more certain. But certainty has never been the requirement. Trust has. You keep thinking obedience will feel like peace first. But peace follows obedience, not the other way around. That's why you feel this tension, because part of you is ready, and part of you is still negotiating. You want assurance without risk. You want direction without surrender. You want me close, but on your terms. And I love you too much to agree to that, because what I am drawing you toward cannot be entered while you are still gripping what you're afraid to lose. You've asked me to take control, but control can't be given. It has to be released. You've asked me to lead, but leading requires following, even when you don't fully understand. You've asked me to change things, but change always begins inside you before it shows up around you. This is the moment where honesty matters more than intention. You don't need to promise me anything. You don't need to commit to everything. But you do need to answer one question, quietly, truthfully, without excuses. Are you willing to trust me even if the next step feels uncomfortable? Because I already know your answer before you speak it. And whatever you choose, it will not just shape what happens next. It will shape who you become as you move forward. So don't rush past this. Don't soften it. Don't talk yourself out of what you feel. Let the wait stay just long enough for the truth to become clear. This is the moment after the question. The quiet space where nothing has changed yet, but everything is about to. You've noticed how still it feels right now. Not peaceful, not chaotic, just still. That's not emptiness. That's the space where a decision is forming. You've spent a long time reacting to life, responding to pressure, expectations, needs, and fears. And without realizing it, you let urgency decide for you instead of trust. That's why slowing down feels unfamiliar. That's why stillness feels uncomfortable. Because stillness forces honesty, and honesty removes excuses. You can no longer say you didn't know. You can no longer say you weren't aware. You can no longer say, this came out of nowhere. You are fully present now, and presence is powerful. Because once you see clearly, you are responsible for what you do with what you see. I am not standing over you with disappointment. I am standing before you with truth, not to corner you, but to free you from pretending. You've been strong for a long time, strong enough to survive, strong enough to keep going, strong enough to hold yourself together. But strength without surrender eventually becomes strain. And I never asked you to carry this alone. You've been afraid that letting go means losing yourself. But what if holding on is what's been costing you? Your joy didn't fade because you failed. Your passion didn't fade because you changed. Your sensitivity didn't fade because you grew up. It faded because you stopped responding when I nudged you. Small nudges, quiet prompts, moments you felt, then ignored, not out of rebellion, out of fatigue. And I see that. But fatigue does not disqualify you. It simply means it's time to stop carrying what was never yours to begin with. You don't need to prove anything right now. You don't need to fix what feels broken. You just need to decide who you're trusting with what comes next. Because this moment, this awareness, will either soften your heart or slowly harden it. And that choice is closer than you think. You may not realize it yet, but something has already shifted. Not outside of you, inside. Because awareness always changes the ground beneath your feet. You can't unsee what you now recognize. You can't unknow what has been brought to the surface. You can't return to the comfort of pretending nothing is being asked of you. And that's why this moment feels fragile. Not because you're weak, but because honesty makes you tender. You've been living with a low, constant pressure for a long time. A sense that you're meant for more depth, more alignment, more truth, but unsure how to step into it without unraveling what you've built. So you learned how to manage the distance. You stayed close enough to feel safe, but far enough to stay in control. And I let you, because forced closeness is not love, and obedience that comes from pressure does not last. But now you're realizing something. The distance you managed has been managing you, shaping your reactions, dulling your discernment, quietly deciding what you avoid, what you settle for, what you call enough. And I don't say that to accuse you. I say it because I want you free. Freedom doesn't begin with bold action. It begins with a truthful pause, a moment where you stop running forward and stop backing away and simply stand where you are. That's where you are right now, standing between who you've been and who you're being invited to become. And that space can feel uncomfortable because it doesn't let you hide behind momentum or delay. It asks you to feel, to notice what rises up when you stop controlling the outcome, to notice what you're afraid will happen if you fully trust me again. To notice what part of you is tired of holding everything together. I'm not rushing you, but I am steady, and I will stay right here, not pushing, not pulling, waiting to see what you do with what you now know. Because this moment is not about speed, it's about direction. And direction is decided quietly, long before it ever shows up in your actions. You're standing in a place most people rush past, not because it isn't important, but because it asks them to slow down long enough to feel what's real. This is the space where motives are exposed, where intentions are tested, where you can no longer blame circumstances for what is actually a hard decision. You've been telling yourself you're waiting on me, but what if all this time I've been waiting on you? Waiting for you to stop asking for signs and start responding to what's already been revealed. Because you don't lack information. You lack alignment. You know what pulls you closer, and what quietly pulls you away. You know which voices sharpen you and which ones numb you. You know when you're choosing faith and when you're choosing familiarity. That awareness didn't come from nowhere. It came from my patience. I've been gentle with you, not because this doesn't matter, but because I know how easily pressure can make you retreat. Still, gentleness does not mean indifference. There is a reason this moment keeps returning, a reason you keep circling back here in your thoughts, a reason your heart won't fully settle. Something in you knows that staying undecided is slowly becoming a decision. And that realization is uncomfortable because it means you can no longer say, I'm just figuring things out. You are choosing, even now, choosing what you give your attention to, choosing what you delay, choosing what you protect, and what you avoid surrendering. And I'm not angry with you for that, but I'm inviting you to notice it. Because once you see the pattern, you have to decide whether you'll keep repeating it or finally interrupt it. You don't need to announce anything. You don't need to explain yourself to anyone else. This is between you and me. A quiet reckoning, a private awareness, a moment where the question is no longer what should I do, but who do I trust enough to lead me? And that question is still open. This is where clarity begins to press in. Not as answers, but as honesty. You're starting to see that this isn't about one decision, one habit, or one moment you need to fix. It's about who has been forming you when you weren't paying attention. Because formation never stops. Something is always shaping you. What you tolerate, what you repeat, what you delay, what you tell yourself doesn't really matter. And for a while, you believed you could stay spiritually aware without being fully surrendered. But awareness without obedience eventually becomes weight. That's why you feel tired in ways rest doesn't fix. That's why motivation fades quickly. That's why your heart feels divided even when your intentions are good. Division is exhausting, not because you're doing too much, but because you're holding two directions at once. You want depth without disruption, growth without loss, calling without cost. And I understand that desire. But nothing alive grows without shedding what no longer fits. You've been asking me to make things clearer, easier, lighter, while resisting the very release that would allow that to happen. Clarity doesn't come from knowing more. It comes from choosing alignment. And alignment always asks one quiet, uncomfortable thing first. What are you unwilling to let go of? Not what you struggle with, what you protect, not what you fear losing someday, what you're actively holding on to now. Because whatever you guard the most is often what I'm asking to be trusted with, not to take from you, but to stop it from owning you. You're beginning to sense that this moment is narrowing, that options are thinning, that the invitation won't stay open in the same way forever. Not because I am leaving, but because repeated delay hardens the heart's response. Sensitivity fades when it's ignored. And I don't want that for you. I want you awake, responsive, free. But freedom doesn't come from avoiding the question. It comes from answering it. And you're closer to that answer now than you've ever been before. This is the edge of the moment, not the decision itself, but the place just before it, where everything in you becomes honest. You can feel it now. The weight hasn't lifted yet, but it's no longer confusing. It's clear. You see that this was never about pressure or performance. It was about direction, about who you allow to shape the next version of you. You've spent enough time circling the same questions, revisiting the same tensions, asking for peace while postponing trust. And now, something in you knows you can't keep living this way without losing something important. Not suddenly, not dramatically, slowly. You don't want a faith that only comforts you. You want a faith that transforms you. But transformation always begins at the place of release. Release of control. Release of certainty. Release of the version of you that insists on staying safe. I am not asking you to leap blindly. I am asking you to loosen your grip. Because trust is not proven by how strongly you believe, but by how willing you are to follow when belief becomes costly. You've felt my patience through all of this, my steadiness, my nearness. That hasn't changed. What's changing now is your awareness of what's being asked. And awareness demands response. You don't need to rush it, but you can't pretend it isn't there anymore. This is the place where delay turns into decision, one way or the other. And as you sit here right now, with this clarity pressing gently but firmly on your heart, there is only one thing left to notice. You already know what the next step is. This is the moment of knowing, not guessing, not wondering, knowing. You've reached the place where excuses grow quiet and truth speaks plainly, where the noise fades enough for you to hear what's been there all along. You're not confused anymore. You are hesitant, and there is a difference. Confusion asks for information. Hesitation asks for trust. You see now that the next step isn't hidden. It isn't complicated. It isn't waiting to be revealed later. It's waiting to be chosen. You've been hoping I would make this easier by removing the weight. But the weight is not punishment. It's significance. Because moments that matter always carry weight. If this were small, it wouldn't feel like this. If it were optional, it wouldn't press on your heart. If it were meaningless, you wouldn't still be here. You've wondered why this feels so personal. Why it feels like this message keeps narrowing in on you. It's because I don't speak in generalities. When I'm inviting someone forward, I speak specifically. You aren't being rushed, but you're being asked. And what I'm asking for is not perfection, not strength, not certainty. I'm asking for willingness. Willingness to stop delaying what you already recognize. Willingness to release what you've been gripping for safety. Willingness to trust me with the part of your life you've kept guarded. You don't need to announce this to anyone. You don't need to change everything today. But you do need to decide who you're listening to now. Because from this point on, doing nothing will no longer feel neutral. It will feel heavy. And heaviness is not meant to be carried forever. It's meant to move you. So stay here for a moment longer. Don't rush past this awareness. Don't talk yourself out of it. Let it settle. Because this is the point where obedience becomes possible. Not because you feel ready, but because you finally see clearly. This is the stillness before movement. Not the kind that feels empty. The kind that feels charged. You can sense it now. Nothing more needs to be explained. Nothing more needs to be revealed. The question has done its work. You're no longer wrestling with whether this matters. You're wrestling with whether you're willing to respond. And that tension you feel, that quiet pressure in your chest, is not meant to overwhelm you. It's meant to clarify you. Because clarity strips away fantasy. It removes the illusion that you can stay the same and still move forward. You've spent a long time preparing in ways you didn't recognize. Learning patience, learning endurance, learning how to survive seasons that stretched you. But survival is not the same as alignment. And now, alignment is being offered, not demanded, not forced, offered. You don't need to become someone new to accept it. You need to stop hiding parts of yourself from you. The doubt, the fear, the reluctance, the weariness you've tried to spiritualize instead of admitting. Bring that here. I am not waiting for a cleaned up version of you. I am waiting for the honest one. Because honesty is the doorway obedience walks through. You've been measuring yourself by how you feel. But feelings are unreliable guides at this stage. What matters now is not emotion, it's direction. And direction is chosen even when feelings lag behind. You don't have to resolve everything in this moment, but you cannot unknow what you now see. This awareness will either soften into surrender or harden into resistance. And that is not a threat. It is simply how hearts work. So remain here just a little longer. Let the silence speak. Let the weight clarify. Because something is forming beneath the surface. And what forms here will shape how you move from this point forward. This is the moment where resistance grows quiet. Not because the fear is gone, but because truth has become louder. You can feel the shift happening inside you. Not dramatic, not emotional, but steady, like something settling into place. You're realizing that obedience was never about proving your faith. It was about trusting me enough to stop protecting yourself from me. You thought distance would keep you safe, but distance has been costing you more than surrender ever could. You've guarded your heart carefully, measured every step, calculated every risk, and that helped you survive. But survival is not where you were meant to stay. I did not shape you merely to endure. I shaped you to walk with me, openly, honestly, without hiding. You've been afraid that if you say yes fully, you'll lose control. But control is not strength. Trust is. And trust does not mean you won't feel fear. It means fear will no longer be the voice that decides. Right now, something in you is loosening its grip. You may not even know what it is yet, only that you're not fighting as hard as before. That's not weakness. That's surrender beginning to breathe. And surrender doesn't arrive all at once. It starts quietly, almost unnoticed, with a softening, with a willingness, with a simple internal agreement. I don't want to keep doing this alone. That agreement matters, because once you stop resisting me, I can begin leading you without friction. Not rushing you, not overwhelming you, but guiding you step by step. You don't need to see the whole path. You only need to stop pulling away. This is where trust stops being an idea and starts becoming a direction. And that direction, once chosen, will begin to change everything, even before anything on the outside looks different. This is where surrender becomes intentional, not emotional, not impulsive, intentional. You're no longer reacting to what you feel. You're choosing how you will respond. And that choice feels quieter than you expected. No rush of certainty, no dramatic relief, just a deep sense of resolve beginning to form. You're realizing that saying yes to me doesn't mean you suddenly understand everything. It means you stop withholding what you already know I've been asking for. You've been waiting for the fear to disappear, but fear doesn't leave before obedience. It follows it. Peace doesn't come from avoiding the step. It comes from taking it. And right now, you're standing at the place where intention matters more than confidence. You don't feel brave. You feel honest. Honest about what you can't carry anymore. Honest about what pretending has cost you. Honest about how much you need me to lead instead of advise. That honesty is sacred, because I can work with honesty. I can guide willingness. I can lead a heart that has stopped negotiating. You're not committing to perfection. You're committing to direction. And direction, once chosen, begins to reshape desire itself. What once felt impossible will start to feel necessary. What once felt costly will start to feel lighter. What once felt unclear will begin to make sense in time. Not because everything changes at once, but because you've stopped resisting change altogether. This is the quiet courage of surrender. No applause, no witnesses, just a heart turning fully toward me. And that turn, that single intentional shift, is enough to begin what comes next. This is the moment after surrender is chosen. Nothing around you looks different yet. Life hasn't shifted. Circumstances haven't changed. But you have. And that matters more than you realize. Because when direction changes internally, alignment follows externally. Always, without exception. You're beginning to notice something subtle. The pressure is no longer fighting you. It's guiding you. What once felt like resistance now feels like resolve. Not excitement, not relief. Resolve. You're no longer asking, should I? You're quietly accepting, I will. And that decision didn't come from confidence. It came from clarity. Clarity that staying where you were would slowly cost you more than moving forward ever could. Clarity that obedience isn't about loss. It's about order being restored. Clarity that trust is not passive. It's directional. You're not suddenly fearless, but fear no longer has the final word. You're not suddenly strong, but you've stopped pretending strength comes from control. And I see that shift. I honor it, because heaven responds to direction, not emotion. What you've done in this moment, quietly, internally, without witnesses, has already begun to realign things you cannot see yet. Conversations will come at the right time. Steps will become clear when they're needed. Grace will meet you exactly where obedience requires it. Not all at once, but faithfully. You don't need to rush ahead now. You don't need to prove anything. Just stay here, in this posture of trust, because the path forward doesn't open to force. It opens to surrender, and you've just taken the step that makes the next one possible. This is where movement begins, quietly, not with noise, not with announcement, but with alignment, taking root beneath the surface. You may expect something dramatic to follow surrender, a rush, a sign, a sudden change in circumstances. But most of the time, I begin with steadiness, because what lasts must be built on something deeper than emotion. You're starting to feel grounded in a way you haven't for a while, not because everything is resolved, but because you're no longer divided. Division drains you, alignment strengthens you, and alignment doesn't always feel exciting at first. It feels clear, it feels settled, it feels like your feet are finally pointed in the same direction as your heart. You don't need to rush the process now. You don't need to make everything happen at once. Obedience is not acceleration, it's consistency. And consistency is formed one faithful step at a time. You may notice old urges losing their pull, old distractions feeling less satisfying, old fears losing their urgency. That's not because you're stronger. It's because you've stopped feeding what kept you stuck. Direction starves confusion. Trust weakens fear. Surrender restores sensitivity. You're beginning to hear me more clearly now, not louder, but steadier. Guidance will come when it's needed. Correction will come with clarity, not condemnation. Provision will meet you on the path, not before it. That's how walking with me has always worked. You don't need to look far ahead. Just stay attentive right here. Because the greatest changes often begin like this, without fanfare, without witnesses, with a heart that has finally decided to walk forward, instead of standing still. This is where trust begins to feel lived in. Not something you think about, something you practice. You're noticing that your responses are changing, not because you're forcing them to, but because your center has shifted. What once triggered anxiety now invites prayer. What once demanded control now invites patience. What once pulled you backward no longer feels as convincing. That's not coincidence. That's alignment taking hold. You're learning that walking with me is less about intensity and more about attentiveness, less about dramatic moments and more about daily choices that point your heart in one direction. You don't have to monitor every step. You don't have to question every feeling. When trust leads, discernment follows. You'll begin to recognize when something draws you closer and when something quietly pulls you away. And instead of negotiating with that awareness, you'll start responding to it. Not perfectly, but honestly. And honesty keeps the path clear. You may still feel moments of hesitation, moments where old habits try to reassert themselves, moments where fear whispers familiar arguments. But now fear has competition. It is no longer the loudest voice, because trust has taken root, and roots don't shout. They hold. You don't need to be vigilant in the way you once were. You don't need to brace yourself for failure. Walking forward doesn't require tension. It requires presence. And presence is where I meet you. Step by step, moment by moment, not ahead of you, with you. This is how the path unfolds. Not all at once, but faithfully. And as long as you stay responsive, you will not walk it alone. This is where the new direction begins to feel natural, Not because it's easy, but because it's true. You're no longer forcing yourself to move forward. You're no longer dragging your heart behind your decisions. Something has aligned. You're discovering that obedience doesn't feel like pressure when trust is present. It feels like relief. Not relief from responsibility, but relief from resistance. You're not carrying everything the way you used to. You're not bracing for impact. You're not constantly preparing for disappointment. You're learning how to walk without gripping. And that changes how everything feels. You still face choices. You still encounter uncertainty. But now you're not asking, what do I need to protect? You're asking, what keeps me aligned? That question simplifies things. It quiets unnecessary battles. It clarifies priorities. It helps you recognize when something doesn't belong, not because it's wrong, but because it pulls you out of step. You're beginning to trust that I will correct you when needed, that I will redirect you if you drift, that you don't have to manage your own formation alone. That trust is not passive, it's active reliance. And reliance creates rest, not the kind that stops movement, but the kind that sustains it. You may not see all the fruit yet. You may not feel dramatically different every day, but something essential has changed. You're no longer standing at the threshold. You're walking. And as long as you keep walking with me, attentive, honest, responsive, this path will continue to open in front of you. This is where confidence begins to grow, quietly. Not confidence in yourself, but confidence in the direction you're walking. You're no longer asking every step if you're doing this right. You're learning to recognize the steady peace that comes from alignment. Not the absence of difficulty, but the absence of inner conflict. You're starting to trust that when something unsettles you, it's worth paying attention to. And when something steadies you, it's worth protecting. That discernment didn't appear overnight. It grew from responsiveness. From choosing to listen when it would have been easier to ignore. From adjusting when it would have been simpler to defend yourself. From staying present instead of rushing ahead. You're realizing now that walking with me doesn't remove responsibility. It reorders it. You're not responsible for outcomes. You're responsible for obedience. And that distinction frees you, because outcomes were never yours to control. You may still feel moments where the old pull returns, old habits, old fears, old ways of thinking that whisper familiarity. But now they don't feel authoritative. They feel outdated. You've outgrown some things, not because you judged them, but because you chose something truer. That's how growth works, quietly, gradually, faithfully. And as this confidence settles in, remember this. Confidence in me does not make you rigid. It makes you responsive. It doesn't harden you. It grounds you. So keep walking at this pace. Not rushed, not hesitant, steady. Because the path you're on now is no longer forming you through pressure. It's forming you through trust. This is where trust becomes your rhythm. Not something you check in on. Something you move with. You're no longer measuring every step by fear of failure. You're measuring it by faithfulness. And that changes how you walk. You're beginning to notice how much lighter your decisions feel when they come from alignment instead of anxiety. How much clearer your thoughts are when you stop rehearsing worst-case outcomes. How much steadier your heart is when you remember you are not leading alone. You're not waiting for permission anymore. You're listening for guidance, and guidance doesn't always shout. Often, it arrives as a quiet sense of this way, a gentle narrowing of options, a calm resistance when something doesn't fit. You're learning to respect that, to pause when something pulls you out of step, to move when something invites trust, to release what creates inner friction, even if it once felt necessary. This isn't passivity. This is partnership. You walk, I guide. You respond, I provide. You stay attentive. I stay present. That's the rhythm. And in this rhythm, you will find that progress no longer feels forced. Growth no longer feels urgent. Faith no longer feels fragile. It feels lived. You may still encounter uncertainty. You may still face moments that require courage. But now, courage doesn't feel like strain. It feels like agreement. Agreement with where you're being led. Agreement with who you're becoming. Agreement with the truth that you are not behind. You are right where responsiveness has brought you. So keep moving this way. Not faster, not louder, just faithful. Because when trust becomes your rhythm, the path doesn't just open. It sustains you as you walk it. This is where faith feels steady. Not intense, not fragile, steady. You're no longer driven by the need to feel something every moment to know you're moving forward. You're learning that faithfulness often looks quiet, and that quiet doesn't mean inactive. It means rooted. You're beginning to trust the process without constantly questioning it, not because questions are gone, but because they no longer control you. You ask differently now. You listen longer. You respond more gently. And that gentleness is strength. You're noticing that obedience is shaping your character before it ever shapes your circumstances. Patience where there was urgency. Discernment where there was confusion. Peace where there was constant evaluation. This is formation. And formation takes time. You don't rush roots. You don't force growth. You stay present and let consistency do its work. You may not always feel inspired. You may not always feel certain. But you are learning something more durable than certainty. You are learning faithfulness. Faithfulness when it's simple. Faithfulness when it's unseen. Faithfulness when no one is affirming what you're becoming. And I see it. Every quiet yes. Every small adjustment. Every moment you choose alignment over ease. None of it is wasted. This is how depth is built. This is how trust matures. This is how a life becomes anchored instead of reactive. So remain here, not striving, not proving, just walking. Because steady faith is the kind that carries you through everything that comes next. 0. This is where endurance takes shape. Not the kind that grits its teeth. The kind that knows why it keeps going. You're beginning to understand that faith is not sustained by moments, but by meaning. You know now why you said yes, why you chose alignment, why you stopped resisting what was quietly calling you forward. That knowing steadies you when things feel slow, when progress feels invisible, when nothing dramatic seems to be happening. Because not everything meaningful is loud. Some of the deepest work happens underground, where roots spread, where strength is formed, where nothing can be measured yet. You're learning to trust that unseen work, to keep showing up without needing immediate results, to keep walking without constant reassurance, to stay faithful even when the reward feels distant. This is maturity, not because you have all the answers, but because you no longer need them to stay obedient. You're discovering that endurance isn't about pushing harder. It's about staying aligned longer, letting truth set the pace, letting trust carry the weight, letting consistency do what urgency never could. You may still face moments of weariness, moments where the old desire for ease whispers again. But now you recognize it for what it is, a temptation to abandon depth for comfort. And you've tasted depth, so you keep walking, not because it's easy, but because it's real. And as you do, something settles deep within you. You're not just moving forward. You're being formed for what's ahead. 0. This is where perspective begins to widen. You're no longer focused only on the step in front of you. You're starting to see how far you've come. Not with pride, with gratitude. You remember how heavy everything once felt, how every decision carried pressure, how faith felt like something you had to manage instead of live. And now, even though the path isn't effortless, It's honest. You're learning that faithfulness compounds, that small, consistent choices quietly reshape the future, that nothing aligned with truth is ever wasted. You don't measure progress the same way anymore. Not by speed, not by recognition, not by how others might define success. You measure it by peace, by clarity, by how quickly you return to alignment when something pulls you off center. That's wisdom forming. You're beginning to trust that setbacks don't erase direction, that pauses don't cancel progress, that correction is not rejection, it's care. And because of that, you're less afraid of missteps. You adjust, you listen, you continue. You're not walking perfectly, but you are walking honestly. And honesty keeps the way clear. You're starting to sense that what's ahead will require this steadiness, this depth, this rooted trust you're learning now. Nothing about this has been wasted. Every moment of resistance, every quiet surrender, every step taken without certainty, all of it has been shaping you. So keep this perspective close, because as the path continues to unfold, it will remind you of one unshakable truth. You are not who you were, and you are becoming exactly who this journey requires. 0. This is where patience begins to feel purposeful, not like waiting without direction, but like staying faithful while something is being prepared. You're no longer anxious about what hasn't happened yet. You're learning to trust the timing of what is forming, because you can sense it now. This season isn't empty. It's intentional. You're being taught how to remain steady without constant confirmation, how to keep choosing alignment even when progress isn't visible, how to value faithfulness over immediacy. And that kind of patience changes you. It softens your reactions. It sharpens your discernment. It teaches you how to move without rushing and how to wait without drifting. You're beginning to recognize that not every delay is a denial. Not every pause is a setback. Some pauses are protection. Protection from moving too quickly. Protection from carrying what you're not ready to hold yet. Protection from outcomes that would have overwhelmed you before your roots were strong enough. You don't resent the waiting the way you once did. You're learning to listen inside it, to notice what rises when nothing else distracts you, to recognize where trust is deepening and where impatience still tries to take control. And instead of fighting that, you're responding to it. That response matters, because patience isn't passive. It's active trust sustained over time. And what's being built in you right now will support what's placed in your hands later. So don't rush this. Don't minimize the quiet work happening beneath the surface. This season is shaping how you will carry what comes next. With steadiness, with humility, with a heart that knows how to remain aligned, even when the path stretches longer than expected. Yours do. This is where hope settles in, deeply, not as optimism, not as expectation, but as assurance. You're no longer hoping something will change. You're trusting someone is at work, and that shift is subtle, but it transforms how you wait. You don't feel the need to manufacture momentum anymore. You don't feel pressured to prove that something is happening. You're learning that faith doesn't rush what trust has already placed in capable hands. You've begun to rest without disengaging, to stay attentive without straining, to remain open without forcing outcomes. That balance didn't come naturally. It was learned through surrender, through patience, through choosing alignment again and again when no one else was watching. And now, hope feels different. It's not fragile. It's not dependent on circumstances lining up quickly. It's anchored in the knowledge that what is meant for you will not require you to abandon who you've become, to receive it. You're starting to sense that timing is no longer your enemy. It's part of the care, because arriving too early can be just as costly as arriving too late, and you're no longer afraid of the pace. You trust it. You trust that nothing aligned with truth is lost, that nothing surrendered is forgotten, that nothing entrusted to me is wasted. So you remain here, not stagnant, not restless, but steady. Hope has taken root where urgency once lived, and that hope will carry you forward with quiet confidence, with patient strength, with a heart that knows it is being led, even when the path ahead has not fully appeared. Duro, this is where trust and hope begin to walk together, not as ideas, as posture. You're no longer bracing for disappointment. You're no longer scanning every moment for signs that something is wrong. You've learned how to remain open without being anxious, and that is a rare strength. You understand now that hope is not wishing for a different future. It's cooperating with the one being formed. You're not passive in this season. You're attentive. You notice when something aligns, and you lean into it. You notice when something pulls you off course, and you release it without drama. That ease didn't come from comfort. It came from clarity. You're no longer driven by urgency to arrive. You're guided by faithfulness to remain responsive. And responsiveness keeps you close enough to hear quiet direction, close enough to sense correction before damage is done, close enough to move when it's time, without panic. You're discovering that walking with me doesn't require you to be constantly alert for danger. It requires you to stay aware of direction. And direction has become familiar to you now. Not rigid, not narrow, clear. You don't need to anticipate every challenge ahead. You don't need to rehearse outcomes. Grace will meet you where obedience leads you. It always has. So remain in this posture, open, steady, willing. Because when trust and hope walk together, the path ahead doesn't need to be fully visible. It only needs to be followed. Zero, this is where faith feels integrated, not separate from your life, woven into it. You're no longer switching between spiritual moments and real life. You're discovering that trust shows up in ordinary choices, quiet responses, unremarkable days. And that realization changes everything. Faith is no longer something you visit. It's something you inhabit. You notice how you pause before reacting, how you listen more than you speak, how you choose alignment even when no one would notice if you didn't. Those choices are forming you. You're not trying to be impressive. You're trying to be faithful. And faithfulness is shaping your character in ways urgency never could. You're learning that walking with me doesn't remove responsibility. It gives it meaning. You show up because it matters. You stay present because it forms you. You keep choosing truth because it keeps you free. Even when days feel ordinary, they are not empty. They are cumulative, each one reinforcing direction, each one deepening trust, each one quietly preparing you for what will eventually require this steadiness. You no longer fear being overlooked. You no longer measure your life by visibility. You understand now what is most important is often least dramatic, and that understanding has grounded you. So continue this way, not striving, not separating faith from life, but letting trust inform how you live, decide, respond. Because when faith becomes integrated, it doesn't need constant attention. It simply carries you forward, faithfully, consistently, whole. Zero, this is where wholeness begins to feel real. Not perfect, not finished, real. You're no longer fragmented, pulled in different directions by competing fears and desires. Your inner life is starting to match your outward steps, and that coherence brings peace. Not the absence of challenge, but the absence of inner contradiction. You're discovering that when your heart and direction agree, life feels simpler, even when it's not easier. You don't exhaust yourself debating every decision. You don't drain yourself replaying every mistake. You don't carry the weight of needing to be everywhere at once. You're learning how to be present where you are. That presence is powerful because it allows you to respond instead of react, to listen instead of assume, to move forward without dragging unresolved tension behind you. You're beginning to trust that growth doesn't require constant evaluation. It requires consistency, showing up aligned, staying honest, letting truth shape your pace. And you're no longer afraid of being unfinished. You understand now that wholeness is not the absence of weakness. It's the absence of hiding. You bring your whole self forward, not curated, not defended, whole. And in that wholeness, you're discovering something steady and sustaining. You don't need to rush who you're becoming. You're already moving in the right direction. Zero, this is where your life begins to feel unified, not compartmentalized, not divided, unified. You're no longer living one way internally and another way externally. What you believe, what you choose, and how you move are starting to agree, and that agreement brings strength. You're not constantly correcting yourself anymore, not constantly explaining your intentions, not constantly managing inner conflict. You're learning how to live from alignment instead of reaction. That alignment doesn't make you rigid, it makes you resilient, because when pressure comes, and it will, you're not scrambling to remember who you are or why you chose this path. You already know. Your decisions come from a settled place now. Your pace reflects trust instead of fear. Your presence carries quiet confidence rather than urgency. You're no longer afraid of slowing down, because slowing down no longer feels like falling behind. You understand something important now. Direction matters more than speed, and staying aligned matters more than arriving quickly. You're becoming someone who doesn't need to prove movement, because movement is evident in the steadiness of your walk. This is maturity taking shape, not loud, not flashy, but deeply rooted. And from this place of unity, whatever comes next will meet you not scattered, but ready. Zero, this is where the journey settles into purpose, not because everything is complete, but because everything is aligned. You're no longer asking, am I doing enough? You're asking, am I staying true? And that question keeps you grounded. You've learned that faith isn't proven by intensity, but by endurance. Not by how loudly you believe, but by how faithfully you walk. You don't feel the need to rush the future anymore. You're present in the now, aware that each step carries meaning when it's taken with trust. You understand something now that once felt distant. God was never trying to hurry you. He was forming you. Every pause shaped patience. Every surrender built strength. Every quiet yes anchored your direction. And here you are, not at an ending, but at a readiness, ready to carry what comes next without losing yourself, ready to move without fear driving your pace, ready to remain aligned even when the path stretches forward. Nothing about this was wasted. Not the struggle, not the waiting, not the moments you thought were delays. All of it has brought you here, steady, awake, grounded. And as you continue forward from this place, remember, you are not walking toward purpose. You are walking in it. Zero. This is where purpose becomes lived, not announced, not displayed, lived. You are no longer searching for a moment that will define everything. You've realized that definition happens through consistency, through showing up aligned, through choosing truth when no one is watching, through remaining faithful when the work feels ordinary. Purpose no longer feels distant or abstract. It feels present, woven into how you listen, how you decide, how you respond. You don't need a spotlight to validate it. You don't need urgency to confirm it. You're learning that purpose is not something you step into once. It's something you walk out daily. And that walk is steady now. You're not pulled by every emotion. You're not shaken by every delay. You're not confused by every unknown. You've learned how to stay aligned, even when the path unfolds slowly. That steadiness is not accidental. It's the result of every quiet surrender that came before this. Every moment you chose trust over control. Every time you stayed when it would have been easier to drift. And now, purpose feels less like pressure and more like presence. You are where you're meant to be. Not because everything is clear, but because you are. So continue this way, not striving to become something more, but faithfully living from what has already been formed. Because purpose doesn't demand that you rush ahead. It asks that you remain true as you keep walking forward. 0. This is where faith becomes quiet confidence. Not confidence in outcomes, confidence in direction. You no longer need constant reassurance that you're on the right path. You can sense it in the steadiness of your heart, in the clarity of your decisions, in the way peace now accompanies movement. You're not guessing anymore. You're trusting what has been formed. You've learned that faith doesn't eliminate uncertainty. It teaches you how to walk through it without losing yourself. You don't panic when answers take time. You don't retreat when progress feels slow. You don't question everything the moment discomfort appears. You stay. You listen. You adjust when needed, without shame, without fear. That kind of confidence is rare. And it wasn't given to you suddenly. It was built through obedience when it was inconvenient, through patience when it was uncomfortable, through surrender when control felt safer. You're beginning to understand that stability is not stiffness. It's flexibility anchored in truth. You can bend without breaking, pause without drifting, move without rushing. And because of that, you're ready for weight, not burden, but responsibility. Responsibility carried with humility, with discernment, with a heart that stays teachable. So don't underestimate where you are now. This quiet confidence is what sustains you when things become demanding, when leadership is required, when others look to you for steadiness. You didn't arrive here by accident. You were shaped for this pace, this posture, this path. And as you continue forward, this confidence will not draw attention to itself. It will simply keep you aligned as the journey continues. 0. This is where steadiness becomes your witness, not through words, not through explanation, through presence. People may not know what shifted in you, but they can sense that something has. You listen differently now. You respond with less urgency and more clarity. You carry yourself with a calm that doesn't need to be defended. That steadiness wasn't learned in comfort. It was formed in obedience when no one applauded, in patience when nothing moved quickly, in trust when outcomes were unclear. And now it shows, not loudly, consistently. You're discovering that influence doesn't come from striving to be seen. It comes from being rooted, from living aligned long enough that your life speaks before you do. You don't rush conversations anymore. You don't feel the need to convince. You don't react from insecurity. You stay present. You stay honest. You stay responsive. And that presence creates space for others to breathe, space for truth to surface, space for direction to become clear. This is not something you manufacture. It's something you carry. Because when faith has been lived quietly and faithfully, it becomes visible without effort. So continue walking this way, not performing, not persuading, simply being. Because the steadiness you now live in will speak more powerfully than words ever could. This is where faith begins to ripple outward. Not intentionally, not strategically, naturally. You're not trying to influence anyone, but your alignment makes space for others to reflect. People notice how you don't rush to fill silence, how you don't react defensively, how you remain grounded even when conversations turn uncertain. And without realizing it, you give them permission to slow down too. That is how impact actually works. Not through force, not through argument, but through a life that has learned how to remain centered. You're discovering that leadership doesn't always look like direction given. Sometimes it looks like stability offered, a calm presence in chaotic moments, a steady response when others feel unsettled, a willingness to listen without needing control. That steadiness invites trust, not because you have all the answers, but because you're not threatened by the questions. You don't rush to resolve tension anymore. You allow truth to surface in its time. You stay attentive instead of reactive, and that posture changes the atmosphere around you. You're beginning to see that what was formed in private is now quietly serving others, not as a role you step into, but as a way you live. And this is only possible because you stopped striving to become something and allowed yourself to be shaped instead. So keep walking this way. Let your life speak without effort. Let your steadiness create room. Let your faith remain lived, not displayed. Because what flows outward now is not something you're trying to give. It's simply who you've become. 0. This is where fruit begins to appear. Not suddenly, not loudly, but undeniably. You're starting to see the effect of all those quiet choices, the patience, the surrender, the consistency that once felt unnoticed. Clarity shows up in moments that used to confuse you. Peace holds steady where anxiety once ruled. Wisdom surfaces without effort when decisions need to be made. This is not coincidence. This is formation bearing fruit. You didn't chase results. You stayed aligned. And alignment always produces something real. You're noticing that your responses now carry weight. Not because they're forceful, but because they're grounded. Your words land differently. Your presence reassures. Your steadiness brings calm where tension once lived. That fruit didn't grow overnight. It grew because you stayed faithful when no one was watching. Because you chose depth over speed. Because you trusted process over pressure. And now, without striving, your life is beginning to reflect what was formed in secret. You're not trying to prove anything. You're not trying to convince anyone. You're simply living from what is true. And that truth is evident. So don't rush this season. Don't downplay what's emerging. Let the fruit grow at its pace. Because what is forming now will continue to nourish you and others for a long time to come. 0 to this is where gratitude begins to deepen, not as emotion, as awareness. You're starting to recognize how much has been carried for you, not removed, but sustained. You see now that strength didn't come from avoiding difficulty. It came from being upheld through it. Moments that once felt heavy now feel meaningful, not because they were easy, but because they shaped you. You no longer resent the slow seasons. You no longer question the quiet ones. You see their value. They taught you how to listen, how to wait without withdrawing, how to remain aligned when nothing demanded it. That recognition softens you. It replaces striving with appreciation. It replaces urgency with reverence. It replaces comparison with contentment. You don't look back wishing things had been different. You look back understanding why they unfolded the way they did. And that understanding frees you. Because gratitude doesn't anchor you to the past. It steadies you in the present. You carry less tension now, less resistance, less need to control outcomes. You trust the path because you've seen its faithfulness. And from this place, you move forward lighter, not because the road is easy, but because your heart is no longer fighting it. This is quiet gratitude, the kind that doesn't need words, the kind that shows up in how you walk, how you wait, how you trust, and it will continue to keep you steady as the journey unfolds beyond this point. 0. This is where humility settles in naturally, not as self-doubt, as clarity. You no longer feel the need to be certain about everything. You're comfortable not knowing, because you trust who is leading you. That trust has softened your grip on being right, on being seen, on being ahead. You've learned that wisdom doesn't rush to speak. It listens first, and listening has changed you. You ask better questions now. You pause longer before responding. You make space for perspectives that once would have unsettled you. That humility isn't weakness. It's strength that no longer needs to defend itself. You're aware now of how much you don't control and how freeing that actually is. You don't carry the pressure of needing to have the answer. You don't shoulder responsibility that was never yours to bear. You walk with openness instead of assumption, with curiosity instead of judgment, with steadiness instead of certainty. And that posture keeps you teachable. Teachable by experience, teachable by silence, teachable by truth when it gently corrects you. This humility didn't come from being diminished. It came from being anchored. Anchored enough to remain open. Anchored enough to keep learning. Anchored enough to grow without fear of being wrong. So stay here, not shrinking, not striving, simply walking forward with a heart that knows it doesn't need to lead alone to move in the right direction. Zero, this is where trust matures into rest. Not rest that stops movement, rest that removes strain. You're no longer carrying the weight of needing to control the journey. You're allowing it to unfold under guidance you trust. That doesn't make you passive. It makes you present. You move when it's time. You pause when it's wise. You remain steady when things feel uncertain. And that steadiness no longer costs you energy. You're learning that rest is not the absence of effort. It's the absence of resistance. When you stop resisting what is forming, your strength is preserved. Your clarity deepens. Your patience expands. You don't feel rushed by the future anymore. You don't feel trapped by the present. You're simply here, attentive, available, aligned. That is rest. And it is not something you arrived at suddenly. It was built through every quiet yes, every release of control, every moment you chose trust over tension. You're discovering that walking with me does not exhaust you. Fighting me does. And now that the fight has faded, movement feels lighter. So continue forward from this place. Not striving, not proving, resting while walking. Because this kind of rest will carry you through whatever comes next. With steadiness, with clarity, with peace that does not depend on circumstance. Zero. This is where peace becomes dependable, not fragile, not circumstantial, dependable. You're no longer surprised when peace stays with you through uncertainty. You've learned that it isn't tied to outcomes. It's rooted in alignment. You still face unknowns. You still encounter decisions that require courage. But they no longer unsettle you the way they once did. Because peace is no longer something you search for. It's something you return to. You've learned how to notice when you are drifting, and how to realign without panic or shame. That awareness keeps you steady. You don't spiral when things don't go as planned. You adjust, you listen, you continue. And that ability to continue calmly is evidence of trust that has matured. You're beginning to see that peace is not passive acceptance. It's active confidence in who is guiding you. Confidence that correction will come when needed. Confidence that provision will meet you on the path. Confidence that nothing essential will be missed. That confidence doesn't make you careless. It makes you courageous. Because you're no longer driven by fear of losing control. You're guided by trust in the one who never lost it. So stay rooted here. Let peace continue to inform how you choose, how you wait, how you move forward. Because this peace, steady, grounded, reliable, will be one of the greatest strengths you carry into whatever comes next. Guru, this is where everything settles into quiet assurance, not certainty about the future, assurance about the one who leads you there. You're no longer asking whether you're supported. You know you are. That knowing doesn't come from circumstances lining up perfectly. It comes from experience, from seeing guidance meet you again and again, from realizing you were never abandoned, only prepared, from understanding that every step mattered, even when it felt small. You don't need to look back with regret. You don't need to look ahead with anxiety. You stand where you are, with confidence that this place, too, is held. You've learned that walking with me doesn't remove uncertainty. It removes fear's authority. You trust that when the next step is required, clarity will come, not early, not late, on time. Until then, you live faithfully in the present, attentive, responsive, at peace. You don't rush endings. You don't cling to beginnings. You move with assurance that nothing surrendered was lost, and nothing aligned was wasted. This is not the end of the journey. It's the way forward. And you are ready, not because you know everything, but because you trust the one who does. This is where assurance becomes your foundation, not something you remind yourself of, something you stand on. You no longer need constant confirmation that you're held. Your heart recognizes it the way the body recognizes solid ground. You've learned the difference between faith that hopes and faith that knows, not knowing outcomes, knowing presence. That knowledge steadies you when nothing around you explains itself. It keeps you grounded when the path curves unexpectedly. It gives you confidence without making you rigid. You don't panic when plans shift. You don't collapse when answers take time. You remain, and remaining has become your strength. You understand now that assurance is not emotional certainty. It's relational trust. Trust built through consistency, through guidance that proved faithful, through surrender that never left you empty. You're no longer asking, will I be okay? You're living from the truth that you are cared for, even when things are unfinished. That truth anchors you. So you move forward without urgency. You wait without fear. You act without striving, because assurance has replaced anxiety as the ground beneath your feet. And from this ground, whatever comes next will not shake you. It will simply meet you steady, ready, and fully supported. This is where trust becomes unshakable. Not because nothing can challenge it, but because nothing can replace it. You've learned that faith is not something you cling to when life feels uncertain. It's something that holds you when uncertainty arrives. That realization changes how you face what's ahead. You don't brace yourself for impact anymore. You don't assume the worst before anything happens. You don't borrow trouble from futures that haven't come. You stay present, because presence is where trust lives. You've seen now that even when things didn't unfold the way you expected, you were never without guidance, never without provision, never without purpose. That history matters. It reminds you that fear has never been a reliable guide, but trust has been, again and again. You don't need to rehearse what could go wrong. You don't need to protect yourself from every possibility. You've learned how to walk forward with open hands, hands that release easily, hands that receive humbly, hands that don't grip what was never meant to be held tightly. This is no naive trust. It is seasoned, formed through surrender, tested through waiting, strengthened through obedience, and now it holds. Whatever comes next will meet a heart that knows how to remain aligned, how to listen before reacting, how to move without fear deciding the pace. This is not the end of becoming. It is stability within it. And from this place, you don't just walk forward. You walk grounded. This is where everything rests in quiet confidence. Not because the road ahead is known, but because you know how to walk it. You no longer need to prepare yourself for every possible outcome. You've learned that preparedness comes from alignment, not prediction. You trust that when the moment arrives, you will have what you need to respond, not in advance, in time. You've stopped asking for certainty before movement. You've learned that movement itself clarifies direction, and that understanding has freed you. You don't hesitate the way you once did. You don't rush the way you once did. You move when it's time, and you wait when it's wise. That balance didn't come from discipline alone. It came from trust that has been lived, not imagined. You've seen that guidance meets you mid-step, that strength arrives when it's required, that peace does not abandon you when the path stretches. So you walk with quiet confidence now, not because you feel powerful, but because you feel supported. You're no longer trying to control the journey. You are participating in it, and that participation is marked by steadiness, by openness, by a heart that remains teachable and grounded. This is not an ending. It is a way of being that carries you forward. Calm, aligned, ready for whatever unfolds next. Zero, this is where the path feels settled beneath your feet, not finished, not familiar in every detail, but secure. You no longer question whether the ground will hold you. You've walked long enough to know it will. That confidence didn't come from certainty about tomorrow. It came from faithfulness, experienced yesterday, and the day before that. You've learned that stability isn't about knowing where you're going next. It's about knowing who you're walking with now. So you don't rush ahead. You don't linger behind. You stay present in each step. You're comfortable carrying responsibility without pressure. Comfortable holding influence without pride. Comfortable moving forward without needing applause. That comfort is not complacency. It's trust fully integrated into how you live. You respond instead of react. You listen instead of assume. You choose alignment even when it's quiet and unseen. And because of that, you remain steady when others feel unsure. You're no longer asking whether you're strong enough. You've learned that strength is supplied along the way. So you keep walking, not searching for something missing, not proving something to anyone. Just faithful, just present, just grounded in the truth that the path beneath you has been made firm and will continue to hold as you move forward. This is where faith becomes your way of standing, not bracing, not leaning, standing. You're no longer adjusting yourself to every shift around you. You've learned how to remain steady, even when circumstances move. That steadiness didn't come from control. It came from surrender practiced over time. You're not surprised by challenges anymore. You don't interpret them as signs you've missed something. You understand now. Difficulty does not mean misalignment. Sometimes it means depth is being trusted with more weight. You meet moments as they come, not ahead of them, not afraid of them. You stay grounded in what you know to be true, even when outcomes are still forming. You no longer rush to resolve tension. You allow clarity to emerge, because you trust that truth does not need urgency to remain true. This posture changes how you carry responsibility. You don't carry it alone. You don't carry it anxiously. You carry it with awareness that guidance is present, support is steady, and you are not required to be everything at once. You are no longer preparing for collapse. You're prepared for continuity, to keep walking, to keep listening, to keep responding faithfully. This is not stagnation. It is readiness without strain. And from this place, whatever comes next will meet you not shaken, not hurried, but standing firm, rooted in trust that has already proven itself. Zero. This is where faith carries weight without strain, not because the weight is light, but because you're no longer carrying it alone. You've learned how to distinguish between responsibility and burden. Responsibility invites partnership. Burden demands control. And you've let control go. You don't feel the need to anticipate every problem before it arrives. You trust that wisdom will meet you when it's needed. Strength will rise when it's required. Grace will be sufficient when the moment comes. That trust has simplified your life, not by removing complexity, but by removing panic. You face what's in front of you, not what might be ahead of you. You've stopped rehearsing outcomes. You've stopped preparing for failure. You prepare for faithfulness instead, and faithfulness has become familiar to you. You know how to listen. You know how to pause. You know how to move when the way opens. You're no longer afraid of responsibility increasing because you know guidance increases with it. You're not being asked to be limitless. You're being asked to be responsive. And responsiveness keeps you grounded, so you remain here, steady, available, aligned, not waiting for life to become lighter, but trusting that you are being strengthened for what you carry. And that trust, quiet, practiced, proven, continues to hold you as the path moves forward. Zero, this is where trust becomes your posture under pressure, not something you reach for, something that holds you. You're no longer surprised when responsibility deepens. You don't interpret weight as a sign you're alone. You recognize it now. Weight is often evidence of trust being extended. You don't tense up the way you used to. You don't rush to escape difficulty. You don't assume something has gone wrong. You stay. You assess. You respond. That response is calmer now, not because the situation is easier, but because you are steadier. You've learned how to carry what's yours without taking on what isn't. You release outcomes you can't control. You attend to obedience you can. That distinction protects you. It keeps you from burnout. It keeps you from resentment. It keeps you from trying to be more than you're meant to be. You're no longer driven by the need to prove capacity. You trust that capacity will expand as needed. And when pressure comes, not if, but when, you don't collapse under it. You let it clarify you. Pressure now reveals what is anchored, what is aligned, what has been formed over time, and what has been formed in you holds. So you continue forward, not bracing for impact, not pretending it's easy, but trusting that whatever you're asked to carry next will be met with grace already prepared. And that preparation has been happening all along. Zero, this is where endurance feels natural, not forced, not fueled by adrenaline. Natural. You're no longer pushing yourself to keep going. You're continuing because you've found your pace, a pace shaped by trust, by awareness, by knowing when to move, on when to pause without guilt. You've learned that endurance doesn't come from ignoring limits. It comes from honoring them. You listen to what strains you. You notice what drains you. And instead of overriding those signals, you respond wisely. That wisdom keeps you steady. You're not trying to outrun the process anymore. You're walking with it. You don't measure progress by exhaustion. You measure it by faithfulness sustained. And because of that, you don't burn out. You don't fade out. You remain. You've learned that endurance is not about being unbreakable. It's about being supported. Supported by truth. Supported by guidance. Supported by a trust that doesn't waver under long seasons. You may still face moments where the road stretches longer than expected. But now, length doesn't intimidate you. You know how to stay aligned over time. You know how to keep listening when nothing feels urgent. You know how to keep moving when nothing feels dramatic. That kind of endurance cannot be rushed into existence. It is formed, and what has been formed in you now will carry you through whatever distance remains, not strained, not scattered, but steady and sustained. Zero D. This is where faith feels sustainable. Not because the road is short, but because you know how to walk it. You're no longer afraid of the long stretch. You don't count steps with impatience. You don't measure distance with dread. You've learned how to remain faithful without urgency pressing on you. That changes everything. You don't quit when progress feels slow. You don't doubt direction when results are delayed. You don't lose heart when the work is quiet. You stay, and staying has become a strength. You've realized that sustainability is not about intensity. It's about rhythm. A rhythm of listening, a rhythm of responding, a rhythm of resting when needed and moving when invited. You're no longer borrowing strength from emotion. You're drawing it from alignment, and alignment replenishes you. You're beginning to trust that you don't need to see the end to remain committed to the path. You only need to stay responsive right where you are. That trust has stabilized your pace. It's removed the fear of burning out. It's replaced striving with steadiness. You're not running out of faith. You're growing into it. And as this season continues, however long it lasts, you are equipped to remain present, faithful, and grounded. Not because you are forcing endurance, but because you have learned how to walk in a way that can last. Zero. This is where the journey becomes quietly complete in its purpose. Not finished, fulfilled. You're no longer measuring where you are against where you thought you should be. You've learned to recognize faithfulness as success. You don't rush to define the outcome anymore. You trust the process that has already proven itself true. You've seen how each step mattered, how each pause protected you, how each surrender shaped you. Nothing was wasted. You're no longer driven by the need to arrive somewhere else. You're living fully where you are, awake, aligned, present. That presence is the evidence that trust has done its work. That formation has taken root. That endurance has become part of who you are. You don't feel pressure to conclude this journey. You understand now that walking faithfully is the point. And from this place, whatever continues ahead will not demand a different version of you. You are already prepared. Prepared to listen. Prepared to respond. Prepared to walk on. Not striving, not fearing, but trusting. This is not an ending. It is a life learned how to walk with faith, steady beneath every step. Zero.